Ah, yes, classroom management, the thing you have to tackle before you can do anything else. Well, I've got two strategies that can transform your classroom. Let's dive in. The first strategy is the Support Challenge Matrix. It was developed by a guy named Nevitt Sanford, a professor at UC Berkeley in the 1960s, but it's still relevant today. So let's break it down. The matrix itself is actually very simple. On one axis, you have high support, low support. The other axis, you have high challenge and low challenge. Each of the different quadrants then represents a different culture or feeling that's created. So you have cozy, you have stressed, you have bored, and you have growth. Let's take a look at what each one actually looks like. Students might feel cozy or comfortable when there is high support and low challenge. Now, this isn't always a bad place to be. Sometimes the students just have so much going on, so much challenge that happens outside of school or even from within school. For instance, if there are a bunch of major assignments in a bunch of their different classes, that can provide a huge amount of challenge. And you might want to adjust and create more support or a supportive environment within your classroom while the students are grappling with that. Sometimes there's more intense things that happen. Hopefully you haven't had this happen, but if there's a tragedy at your school, if there's a tragedy that's happened in the country or state, then it might be time to put learning aside and actually deal with the emotions that the students are having and pull back, hear what they're saying, support them in how they're feeling. But it's not a quadrant that you want to stay in for long term. If you do, the students start to feel entitled, they start to feel complacent, as if any additional challenge was some kind of affront on their freedom. So you want to make sure that you're balancing the challenge with the support that you're providing. On the other extreme, you have high challenge but low support. Students might feel depressed, unprepared, discouraged, stressed out because they don't have the skills, they don't understand the grading, they don't have enough time. There are a variety of things that create this challenge for the students and make them feel like they're not adequate, they're not going to be successful. So when you do this, it's important to create enough support for the students so that they have the skills, they have the understanding, the time that they need to be successful. If they don't get the support that they need, this is when they can either just shut down, become apathetic to it, feel discouraged, and so not want to engage, or they act out. They start pushing back on the assignments. They start asking questions that are just postponing them getting into an assignment. This is when you could have students looking for other ways to get validation. So if it can come from being a class clown or from getting notoriety from other students, this may be a way of compensating for the great amount of challenge that they feel and may not feel competent to tackle the tasks that you're giving them. The quadrant where there is low support and low challenge, you don't want to be in this quadrant. It's boring and nobody's learning anything. There may be times when you feel completely burnt out, like you don't have any energy that you can bring to the classroom. At this point, you probably need to seek some additional help. Figure out how you can recuperate so that you can begin bringing more of the support and challenge that you know needs to happen within the classroom. And the final quadrant is the one where there is high support and high challenge. This is where the greatest amount of growth comes from. This is where the students feel like they have enough information, they have enough of the skills to be able to succeed with a challenge that stretches their ability. And it's so fun to see students when they get into this quadrant because they are so engaged with the content. At this point, you might be asking, well, what is support and what is challenge? And I know this sounds like a cop-out, but it really depends on the context and it depends on the person. Let me give you an example. I had a student that was acting out, and he was being very disruptive to the class. I did all the normal types of classroom management things like giving him the look or proximity and getting a little bit closer to see if my physical proximity would actually change the behavior. And he was still acting out in ways that weren't allowing the other students to participate well. So I had to ask him to leave the classroom. After I had these other students engaged in an activity, I was able to go outside. When I came outside the classroom, he was sitting on the ground. And instead of laying into him, instead of yelling at him like I knew he expected, instead I sat down next to him and giving him a minute of space to have him realize that I wasn't going to lay into him, that I was interested in hearing his side of the story. He opened up a little bit and explained some of the trauma, some of the difficult things that were happening outside of the classroom that were influencing the way that he was behaving. And we kind of talked through it. I said that I was available to help support him in whatever way he needed, but that he couldn't continue to behave that way within the classroom. I told him he could take some time and come in when he was ready. And when he did, he was much better. We had begun to establish some rapport that went back beyond just simply what was happening in the classroom and was more relational. So ultimately, you want to be able to have high support and high challenge. And navigating that within the classroom means taking a look at what are you doing on a more continuous basis and navigating how you can provide the right support, the right challenge, and have it be even individualized. Some students might require a different type of support or a different type of challenge than some of the others. But it becomes a lens in order to figure out what's happening with the culture of your classroom. Now, the second strategy is actually one that's pretty straightforward, and that's to journal. When you're outside of the immediate stresses of the classroom, at home, you're sitting with your favorite beverage, you're outside in nature, you're relaxing in your favorite chair, you take a deep breath and you think about what are the patterns, what are the repeated things that happen in the classroom that are disruptive. And since you have space away from the emotions of the moment, think about what might be driving that behavior. Is it support challenge? Is it something else? What's contributing to that? And how can you then preempt those types of behaviors? If you come up with strategies outside of the moment, it'll be much easier to implement those strategies when they happen again in the classroom. So take the time to journal and figure out some of those strategies before you're in those high pressure circumstances. All right, so here's an additional little tool, a tip, is to use the support challenge matrix as an exit strategy for the class. So you explain the support challenge matrix to the class. You have them at the end of the class tear off a sheet of paper. They just draw the matrix, or you put it on an index card, and they plot where they felt they were during your class. So if they felt more challenged than support, then they might put a dot in the stress quadrant. Or vice versa, if they felt like they were had a lot of support but not much challenge, they might put themselves in the cozy quadrant. This gives you immediate feedback for that class as far as where the majority of the students felt that they were. And for those students that were off of the growth quadrant, to begin contemplating how can you bring them into that quadrant? What kind of supportive challenge do they need in order to move forward feeling more successful?